make up the Africa Great Lakes are Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, Tanzania, and the DR Congo. These are some of the most troubled spots in our world today. The Friends Peace teams utilize local, creative, culturally appropriate, and non-violent programs to work towards reconciliation, healing, and building lasting peace in these areas. We hope tonight that you will be informed, that you will be moved, and quite possibly inspired by what has been achieved and will continue to be achieved.
I'm the coordinator of an organization called the African Great Lakes Initiative, or AGLI, A-G-L-I. Africans like to make a word, so it's AGLI. And we started in 1998. The Quakers received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1947 because of the work that they had done after the First World War and after the Second World War in feeding children and finding lost, putting families together and things of that sort. Now, that's relief. In these days, there's a tremendous number of organizations doing that kind of relief. You know, the World Food Organization, World Vision, Caritas, you go on, big organizations that are doing the kind of relief work that the Quakers did, you know, after the First and after the Second World War. The Quakers, though, have, I think, moved on in that we've realized that when there's fighting and wars and conflicts, there's psychosocial damage. It's easy to say, hey, let's build new houses, or to give seeds, or other things that happen, you know, material kinds of things. But we've also learned that people are very psychologically damaged, and the society is very much damaged by these things. So the work that the Quakers have been doing, and not just my group, but many Quaker groups, and also others like the Mennonites, has to do with psychosocial issues. And essentially that's what I'm going to be speaking about tonight. We're part of a larger group called Friends Peace Teams. So we have 3 projects: the African Great Lakes Initiative, which is the one I'm in charge of. They also do peace building in Las Americas, which is Central America and Colombia. And then we have another project in Asia, West Pacific, which does Nepal and Indonesia. Now this is the Great Lakes region. Now I can see if I can go up here without falling down. This is Kenya. Oh, this is the Atlantic Ocean over here, right here. This is Kenya, this is Uganda, and this is Tanzania, and Rwanda there, Burundi here, and this is the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Now, the Democratic Republic of the Congo is as big as Western Europe, just that one country. But you can also see that Rwanda and Burundi are extremely small. And the work we do is in North Kivu here and South Kivu there. Gladys and I, this is Kenya, here's Nairobi. Gladys and I live here in Lumakanda, which, as you can see, is near the border of Uganda. Right between these two towns is Mount Elgon, which is one of the higher mountains in Africa, and we can see it from our kitchen window. And I will be speaking a little bit about Rwanda and Burundi, which you can see are very small and similar countries. At one time, they were called Rwanda Urundi during the colonial period when the Belgians ruled them. As I said, I'm a member of the organization called Friends Peace Teams, and in 1998, we had a meeting, and I was one of the representatives from Baltimore, and that was the time of the Kosovo problems, and we were talking about what we should do there, and I kind of piped up that, well, what about Africa? There's so many problems in Eastern Africa, and there are many Quakers. There's more Quakers in Kenya than any other country, and there's also a large number in Burundi and smaller numbers in those other countries. So the group said, well, what do you want to do? And I piped up with the idea that we would send a delegation to the regent to meet with people there and see what was going on. Now, the first objective was just to visit with the Quakers and other people in Rwanda, Burundi, Eastern Congo, Kenya, and Uganda, and see how they had been affected by the violence in their countries. Now, Rwanda had a genocide in 1994. Burundi had a civil war from 1993 through 2005, so it was still going on when we went. And Uganda's had the large resistance army in northern Uganda, and Kenya's had 3 times of post-election violence. So this is a part of the world that's had many, many problems. So we wanted to find out what kind of peacemaking work the Quaker and Quaker groups were doing there, and we found out that, of course, particularly in Rwanda and Burundi, they were doing a lot. And but then we asked if they wanted to work with us and partner with us in doing more activities. So the first activity we did with them is a program called Alternatives to Violence Project, or AVP, and it's a program began in 1975 in New York's city prisons, and it's a 3-day experiential kind of workshop where you teach people how to solve problems nonviolently. And as I said, that was mostly done in prisons in the United States. And the themes are respect for self and others, communication skills, cooperation, and then conflict resolution skills. So we took this program to the region, and we introduced it to Rwanda in 2001, Burundi 2002, Kenya in 2003, the Eastern Congo in 2005, and Tanzania in 2008. And let me just sort of give you an idea of the kind of things that are done in the AVP program. This is a exercise called mask, and you can see some of the people have paper masks on, and those are the elite, and the ones with no mask are the servants. And you have certain rules of how you do this little exercise, and for example, the servants cannot address the masters without the master's permission. They have to call them Mr. and Mrs. or Madam. And of course, the elite can just call their servants whatever they want to. And there's rules like this. And so you do that about 20 minutes or 30 minutes. And then you have people change the roles so that the masters become the servants and the servants become the masters. And you play the same game again for another 30 minutes. And then you finish with the game, and people sit around in a circle like these people are right here, and you say, well, what happened? And what happens, and they pick this up real quickly, is those people who were the servants first, but then came the rulers, treat their servants worse than the first group. In other words, they're doing retaliation, and because they've been humiliated and things like that. But what's interesting about when you do this, like in Rwanda, is that this is also the history of the country, and they realize it very quickly. Originally, the Tutsi were on top, then the other group called the Hutu were on top, and then the Tutsi were on top again. And so that same dynamics works in a cultural sense as much as in a personal kind of thing. Well, these are the kinds of exercises we do for 3 days that brings people together and teaches them how to resolve conflicts nonviolently. as soon as even on that first delegation in 1999, as we went, and particularly in Rwanda and Burundi, people said everybody's traumatized in these countries. I mean, if you've been through a genocide, people are traumatized. The society is traumatized. In Burundi, of course, the civil war had been going on for years, and so people are traumatized from the Civil War. You guys are Canadians, but you know, in America, the American Civil War, we haven't recovered from it yet, and that's over 150 years ago, I think, something like that now. So they asked us to develop a similar program to the AVP one, the Alternatives to Violence, dealing with trauma. And so in January of 2003, we did a 1-month training on trauma healing, and after that training, the people who were in it developed a similar program called Healing and Rebuilding Our Communities, HROC, which we call HEROC. Okay, these are the principles of the workshops. So who would like to read the first one? Go ahead.
There is good in every person.
For those who are Quakers, know that this is actually the basis of Quakerism, that there is that of God, or that of, and since it's non-sectarian, we change it to good, that people are good. And when you're working with people who have killed other people or have had their family members killed by other people, this concept that people have that goodness in them is extremely important. Number 2, who would like to read that?
Principle number 2, each person and society has the inner capacity to heal and an inherent intuition of how to recover from trauma.
Now notice we say here, each individual and society. When you've had a genocide or a civil war, people are traumatized, but the society is also traumatized. So when we first sent our first 4 people, 2 Americans and 2 Burundians, we didn't bring them to the West, to United States, Canada, or England, because here people think as trauma, psychosocial trauma, as an individual problem and not a societal problem. We sent them to South Africa because about that time was when the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of South Africa was winding up, and if you read about that, it was an attempt to deal not only with personal traumas, but the societal traumas of apartheid. So that's how we came our thing. But the other thing is, if there's goodness in every person, there's also the capacity to heal and to understand your situation and to heal yourself and the others around you. Number 3. Right. It's very simple or easy for us to sympathize with the victims. And the tendency is to ostracize, ignore the perpetrators. But in fact, the perpetrators are traumatized by what they've done. In fact, in some cases, even more. I mean, if you kill people, you're traumatized from having done that. And so when we do our program, we bring the victims and the perpetrators together. And we found that to do this, you need to bring like 10 Tutsi survivors of the genocide and 10 Hutu perpetrators. They have to be equal numbers, or if one group, I got water here. If one group is too many over the other one, then the smaller group doesn't talk. So you need equal numbers of people. When we first start, the Tutsi are in this, it's all from the same little community, so everybody knows everybody. So the Tutsi are on this side, the Hutu are on that side. They don't look at each other, they don't greet each other, they don't talk to each other. And in 3 days of this workshop, we have to turn that around so that the people who are in the workshop restore those kind of normal relations that they had before the genocide or before the civil war in Burundi. well, it's local language. I don't do this myself. We have facilitators who do it, and it's in local language. 4. Yeah.
Healing from trauma requires that a person's inner good and wisdom is sought and shared with others.
Yeah. So the important part of this is that everybody has that inner capacity to understand what to do. But frequently it's been suppressed, it's been ignored, or it's been lost. And what we found also is the sharing. It's not just a individual kind of thing, but if I'm in a workshop with 20 people and I share my experiences, but then I hear the 19 other people their experiences, that makes people realize their commonality, including people from the different sides of the conflict. They hear each other, how they've suffered from various different kinds of things. 5. Go ahead.
Efforts to heal and rebuild the country must also happen at both the individual and community level.
So that's what I mentioned before. Trauma healing is both a individual kind of thing, but if the society is not healed, then it's very difficult for the individual to heal. Now, if I can give, I won't say anything about Canada because I'm not a Canadian, but I'll talk about the United States. In the United States, trauma is considered an individual kind of thing, and they have all these massacres at schools and churches and all those kind of things, and they deal with the individual trauma, but there's never any even thought or work on that underlying root causes of the violence that are in society. And without dealing with those root causes at the community level, you're not going to, you're going to continuously have more and more of the kind of violent things that you have in the United States. At number 6.
Trauma recovery and peace-building efforts must happen simultaneously.
Yeah, one of the problems that, if you know, when a country's gone through conflict, the United Nations has found that there's about a 50% chance of the conflict reoccurring within the next 5 years. And one of the problems was they were just doing peacemaking efforts, but without doing the trauma efforts. And we found that if you want to do successful peacemaking work, you first have to deal with the trauma, because if you haven't dealt with people's trauma and the society's trauma, then your peacemaking efforts are going to be a blank and give different kinds of problems. So the workshop was a 3-day workshop, and the first day is on trauma. Its causes, its consequences, its symptoms, and most people, well, it was like it was before the Vietnam War here. People came back from the war and they were traumatized, and we thought, well, it's just something wrong with the people, they're crazy or whatever. In Africa, sometimes they think that they're possessed by demons, they're crazy people. And so by teaching people what trauma is, and that actually it's natural response to traumatic, really traumatic kinds of experiences. And when we start out, well, first thing we do some kind of games to loosen people up. We have the first game, usually is one called Big Wind Blows, where people sit in a circle and then everybody with shoes or glasses, let us say, changes seats and the others don't, and then everybody with a white shirt changes seats. And what that does is it mixes the Hutu and Tutsi up because they've been sitting together. And it also is fun, and it has energy and stuff like that. And then we work on confidentiality so that people feel safe while they're in the workshop. And it's actually done by the facilitators who talk about their own stories a little bit. And it's actually it's not so difficult to do. So that's the first day. Now the second day, we follow a book called Judith Herman, Trauma and Recovery is the name of the book, and there's stages of recovery from trauma. Well, one of the things is grief. You have to grieve about your losses, and if you don't, you can't move on the healing path. So what we do is what we would call a guided meditation. We ask people to close their eyes and to remember the people or things or time or whatever they've lost, and not to focus on what people do is, of course, they focus on that traumatic incident where, say, their cousin was killed. But we ask them not to think about that, but to think of your cousin and the times you had, good times you had together with your cousin, you know, when you were young, whatever you were doing, and think of positive things. Now, when we do this, we get a lot of resistance from people because they don't want to bring back those things that have happened. But it's necessary to do that. Now, when they finish this session, everybody pretty much is crying. There's usually a tea break after that, and everybody's very, very quiet and somber. But even those people who have resisted the idea then realize how they have to go through that grieving process. Now, one of the parts of the grieving process that we'll actually discuss a little bit later is proper burial. In Africa, you must bury the physical remains of people when they die. So like in the genocide, or even in Rwanda, people are killed, but they never found the bodies. They don't know where they were. And so there's that closure of having actually found the body and buried it properly with the local customs is there. Then in the afternoon of the second day, it has to do with anger. Most people who are traumatized are very angry, and so we deal with the negative aspects of anger and also how to turn that negative anger into positive anger. And the third day is to rebuild trust. And we do a number of things that to do this. One of the games we play is one that you've all played. It's Trust Walk, where one person is blindfolded and the other one, second person leads them around outside, and they keep them from running into a tree and falling down the steps and things like that. And after you've done that 20 minutes or so, then you change places, and the blind person becomes the guide, and the guide becomes the blind person. I presume most of you or everybody has played that game when you were a kid. But we've had people, when we do this game, of course, we have a Hutu and a Tutsi who are the enemies are going to be paired up together. We've also, as you will hear later, we've had cases where a person is paired up with the person who killed their family members by chance, because it all has to be by chance, but it does that. When we do our HEROC workshops, we, you can't just do a 3-day workshop and you say goodbye. We found the next stage is 1 or 2 months later, is to bring those people back together, and the same 20 people, and say, well, what's happened in the last month or so? And you hear about what progress has people had, or maybe not progress, but what's happened. And we've also found that you can't just do one of these workshops in a community. You must do at least 5 of these workshops, so you have at least 100 people who've gone through these workshops. And people, particularly in Rwanda and Burundi, like to then do what they call a community celebration, which is all those people come and they bring, a friend or a spouse, and the government officials there, and the priest is there, and the pastors and whomever, and there's singing, and there's dancing, and there's role playing and storytelling, and at the end of it, people eat together. Now, in this part of the world, if you eat together, that means you're reconciled, because people are always worried about being poisoned, and so we do these community celebrations frequently. And then the next stage is to train 4 healing companions in a community. So one will be a Hutu woman, a Hutu man, Tutsi woman, and a Tutsi man. So you have gender and ethnic balance. And we train them together in a 2-week training, and then they go back to their communities with assistance. They do some of these HEROC basic workshops, and then when things happen in their community, they're the people who respond. And then those people frequently want to continue working together, and so they develop various different kinds of projects. I just want to, I can't go through all these, but I'll look on number 2 with the GOAT program. This we've done in Burundi in particular. We get a pregnant female goat, and we give it to two women, one Hutu and one Tutsi. So the first thing that they have to do is to decide who's going to take care of the goat until the kid is born. But the point of the goats is twofold. First, it brings the two sides together. And I didn't realize this at the beginning, but the reason to give women goats is for their manure. That Burundi is a very small country, overpopulated, and the soils are worn out. And so the goat manure probably increases their yields by 3 or 4 times. Number 1, we do these international trainings. We started them in 2011, where we do a 3-week training in Rwanda. The first 3 days, you are a participant in one of these basic HEROC workshops with Rwandans, survivors and perpetrators of the genocide. Then there's a 2-week training period, and then you do a apprentice workshop with experienced facilitators, again in Rwanda. And as we've done this, we've gotten people from many different countries, and so the program has expanded out of Rwanda and Burundi, first into Eastern Congo and Kenya, but now there's a group from northern Nigeria that works with Boko Haram. If you remember those 200 girls who were kidnapped, well, that's working with those. And Mennonite Central Committee is working with people in Eastern Congo, and in the next one, they're going to send people from South Sudan to the trainings. And we've also had some people from the United States, and they've done some work in the United States, particularly in Baltimore, Maryland, Boise, Idaho, and Concord, New Hampshire, with immigrant communities. Frequently, one of the groups is Bhutanese immigrants into the United States who have the trauma of what they happened to them in Bhutan, and then, of course, the trauma of being an immigrant in the United States, and most of these people have little education. Some of them don't know English very well, or maybe not at all. So we've done a little bit of this in the United States. So far, I guess we have not done anything that I know of in Canada. So this is the end of my presentation. And you can see there's my 2 books, or 2 of my books.